I'm a woman in my early 20s, and I live in a flat with a male friend of the same age. Our flat is on the top floor with our kitchen window above the door. We have all of our windows open at the moment because we smoke, plus it's summer and it's hot all the time. There's usually at least one of us at home all the time, as I work 9 to 5 and he works nights, so the open window thing isn't really a problem. A few weeks ago, my flatmate went away for a few days, so that day he happened to close the window in the kitchen. It's maybe the first time it's been closed in the 6 months that we've lived there. So, that night, I came home drunk and was on the sofa dicking around on my phone when I guess I fell asleep. Around an hour later, maybe 2 a.m., I'm awoken by a weird scratching noise in the kitchen. I now realize that it was someone clawing at the window they expected to be open, but at the time, I was really wasted. I got up and turned on the light to go to the bathroom, and the scratching stops. I go to the bathroom, not thinking about the noise that woke me up, when I hear a loud scratching noise, much more guttural. I go back to the kitchen and look out the window, and there's someone over the road, dragging a big stepladder away. Again, I didn't really think too much about it because I was tired and in a daze. The next day, I look out my kitchen window and see directly under it that there's a board to safely stand on surfaces that might bust easy, like a fragile roof thing over a front door. Well, I called the landlord to ask if there was any work happening to the house that we weren't informed about. And no, there was nothing. I have no idea if the person tried to break in again, but I only thought about sharing this as my flatmate went away again 2 days ago, and at some point today, the board outside the window disappeared. This happened about 4 years ago when I was 16, and a few weeks away from beginning my senior year of high school. My mum and I were taking a trip out to New Jersey to visit my aunt, who we hadn't seen in a relatively long time. We arrived early in the afternoon and we had a great time. It was great catching up with my aunt, and nothing out of the ordinary happened during our visit anyway. It was around 9 o'clock at night by the time that we left my aunt's house, and took about 20 minutes for us to hop onto the turnpike. About a half hour into our drive, my mum noticed that we only had a quarter tank full of gas left, and decided to stop at the nearest gas station to fill up. We asked the attendant to fill up our tank with $20 worth of gas, and while he was pumping the gas, I asked my mum if I could grab a bottle of water from the store real quick. She said sure and handed me a few dollars. She asked me if I could grab her a pack of gum as well while I was still in there, and told me she'd pull into the parking lot on the left side of the store once the attendant was finished pumping the gas. So I walked into the store, grabbed everything, and waited in line to check out. The line was a little long, so it took about 5 minutes until I paid for everything and walked out of the store. I turned right and began walking towards the car when I noticed a man standing next to my mum's window talking to her. And all of a sudden, I hear my mum yell at him, "Get the hell away from me, you sick bastard." I ran up to the man, got in his face and yelled, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The man was probably in his late 30s, and he was wearing a Yankees t-shirt and black shorts. He had very dark brown eyes, jet black hair, and a pretty disheveled moustache to top it all off. He was very sickly looking, and looked a bit thinner than he should have been for his height, to which he was probably about 5'7" and 130 pounds. He began freaking out, apologizing profusely, and saying that it was all a misunderstanding and that he deserved a second chance. I screamed at him to get the hell out of here before I smashed his face against the concrete, and he ran off and got into his black car that was parked on the other side of the lot and drove off. I got into the car and asked my mum what had happened while I was in the store. She said that the man had walked up to her and asked her for directions to Jersey City. She answered his questions to the best of her abilities, to which he thanked her, smiled, and then he said, "You're very beautiful, you know that." My mum has had creeps try to hit on her before, and she had a feeling this guy was a creep right from the get-go. So she thanked him for the compliment and showed him the wedding ring on her finger and said that she was already taken, hoping that it would deter him as it usually worked in the past. He started rambling on about how she's in an abusive marriage and he can tell by the look on her face, and that if she gave him a chance, he could treat her right. He also said disgusting things about what he wanted to do to her if they had sex. My mum screamed at him to get away from her, and then cue me walking out of the store and scaring him off. Anyway, we drove out of the gas station and eventually put what happened in the back of our minds. About a half hour into our drive though, I looked into the side mirror and I noticed a car following behind us. The highway was pretty well lit, so I recognized that it was the car that belonged to the man that we had encountered earlier. I told my mum about it, and she says that she noticed the car following us for the past 10 minutes. She said that she was going to get off at the next stop to try and lose him. We got off at the next stop and quickly began making numerous turns down the side blocks, and also sped down them to try and lose the creep following us. He followed without fail for about 5 minutes though, until my mum passed an intersection, and the man sped up to try and keep up with us, but was forced to slam on his brakes when the lights turned red, and the cars had already begun passing by. My mum used this opportunity to speed up and turn down another block. She pulled into a McDonald's parking lot and made sure to park behind the building. She turned the car off, and we waited about 10 minutes just to be sure that we had lost this creep. I was pretty anxious at this point, and I know my mother was too, but she managed to stay pretty well composed, despite our current situation. We assumed we had lost him, and my mum turned the car back on, and we drove towards the block that would let us back onto the highway. We turned onto the road, and it was pretty well lit, but it was relatively empty, save for us and the occasional vehicle passing by. And not even a minute later, we see a car speeding up towards us in the distance until we see that it's the same creep from before. My mum and I start flipping our shit at this point. We just wanted this crazy man to go away. Our luck must have spiked at that point, because all of a sudden, we see red and blue lights flashing in the distance, and a police siren that was getting louder by the second. The cop must have been hiding somewhere, or was about to turn onto the road when they had seen this creep speeding, and proceeded to chase after him. He speeds past us, with the cop following him, presumably trying to evade him. Relieved, we turned back onto the highway and continued our drive home. We were both shaken up quite a bit from what had just happened, but we managed to calm down after a while. We were both just glad that we had gotten away from that creepy man and that nothing bad had happened to either of us. The rest of our drive went by pretty uneventful, thankfully, and we made it home safe. So, this is not my experience, but the experience of a family friend of ours. It happened probably about 10 years ago, but it's still one of the most terrifying paranormal stories that I've ever heard. So, my mum had this friend who was a father to a little boy. He was about 5 or 6 at the time of this story. For a few years, he'd been saying that he could see what he described as dinosaurs, or some kind of creatures that were, in short, scaled or reptile in appearance. He'd see them all the time, and as you'd expect, his parents thought that it was an imaginary friend type of thing. This went on for a while with no harm coming from it, so they largely just ignored it as a childhood phase. Well, one weekend, the kid's dad was helping his sister out with a DIY job and brought him along. The kid was outside playing in the garden while they were in the kitchen, when suddenly the kid runs in unable to breathe. They thought he was choking on something as there was nothing around his neck. Everyone started freaking out and panicking, trying to get him to spit up whatever he'd swallowed. However, nothing appeared to work, and his lips actually started to go blue, and they were about to call for an ambulance when he suddenly took in a massive breath of air. After a few minutes, he seemed to recover from whatever had happened, but when he had calmed down, a reddish mark slowly began to emerge around his neck. Eventually, it morphed into a band of bruising like you'd expect to see on someone who'd been hanged or strangled with a cord. When he was asked what had happened, the boy said that he'd been playing with the dinosaurs outside when one of them began to strangle him. He described feeling a burning sensation around his neck where it held him. The bruising lingered for a while before it eventually faded, but they never found out a logical explanation for where it had come from. But after that, the boy never saw the dinosaurs ever again. I live in a small town, kind of sandwiched between three slightly larger towns, and my house happens to sit in a valley near a trestle that can take you to all of them depending on which one you're taking. The valley is extremely dark at night, as there aren't many streetlights, only about one every mile. On top of that, there are a lot of straightaways between it and my house, with one road in particular going straight for about 3 miles. There are lots of farms, and because of the drug house near me, it's not uncommon nowadays for random crackheads to be walking up and down this road at night. And my girlfriend lives in one of the larger towns that surrounds mine, and it's about a 25-minute drive to get to her house. One night, as I was taking her home, I saw a few cars parked underneath the trestle, a little bit to the side of the only streetlight there. It's not uncommon to see cars parked there, and I didn't think much of it. There were people outside of the cars talking to each other too. I'll never forget what I saw on my way back from dropping my girlfriend off though. As I was coming down the off-ramp, I saw that one of the vehicles was still there, and propped up against the stop sign was what was very obviously a person, completely wrapped in a black bag, on their feet. They seemed like they were tied together, but I could still see their shoes. There's not a lot of traffic that comes through that area, and gang activity is common because it's concealed from everyone that doesn't live in one of the 2 houses there, and they have a ton of branching escape routes if someone calls the cops. I mean, they can get on the trestle, which has 3 different exits you can almost immediately take. They can go along a road that runs parallel to the trestle and would allow them to take one of the 4 different roads that leads to different towns or the freeway, or they can go to the direction that leads to where I live. Again, with multiple roads that they can take them through a few wooded areas or straight into town. It's the perfect spot for people to commit crimes like this. I did call the police, but I sure didn't stick around. I could tell that whoever set this person up was watching. They were right there, right in the only lighted area for miles if you weren't on the trestle. And I had a huge feeling of dread sitting over me. I waited until a little past a bend where you could no longer see that area to call the police, not wanting to spook whoever was doing this and make them leave with a kidnapped person, or to try and stop me from making the call to the police in the first place. After I hung up and the police said that they were sending someone, before I made it home, I decided that I would turn around after all and see this through. I felt ashamed that I hadn't been there the whole time, and I wanted to make sure that if someone did come along to load that person up, I could see them and follow them if they gave the cops the slip. When I got back though, the bag and the car were both gone. I had been absent for all of 2 or 3 minutes, and someone had gotten that person in their vehicle and driven off. When the police got there, I told them what I saw, but they didn't seem to be taking anything I said seriously. They said that they would look into it, but I don't think they ever did. Every so often, I think about who that person was and whether or not I could have saved them, or if I made the right call by not staying there for whatever happened, or even if the person I saw was still alive at that point in time. Having a person out like that in the open told me that they didn't care if anyone saw what they were doing, and that's the part that worried me the most. I sure hope they're okay. Let me start with a little backstory. I was 28 when this happened, and my daughter was 8, and my wife and her mother, they were hospitalized with pneumonia. The hospital she was in is 2 hours from our house, and visiting hours ended at 9 p.m. It was a Friday night, and since my daughter hadn't seen her mum in a few days, we went, and we stayed till the nurses made us leave. It was almost 10 when we finally pulled out of the hospital parking lot. At the time, cell phones were still uber expensive, and the car I owned at the time was an old Pontiac Sunfire, and so I decided to give up the ghost about an hour from home. So, it's dark, lonely, in the middle of nowhere in the hills of Kentucky. Everything is good as we headed home, and my baby girl is talking about what kind of handmade card she was making for Mum when we got home. The radio was off, and like I said, everything was all good. But then it wasn't. The car stalled and it just refused to start back up again. I managed to pull the shoulder off the road and told my baby to lock the door and not to unlock it for anyone except me. She nodded and proceeded to hit the button, and I raised the hood, and I tried to see if I could spot any obvious reason for the engine to die, and of course, there wasn't one. After a few minutes of checking fuses, checking for fuel pressure, etc., I decided that the car was a lost cause and that we had to get the hell home. It was a secluded backcountry road, and there weren't any houses for about 1.5 miles from where we were. I told my baby to get out of the car and I'd put her up on my shoulders. We walked for about 10 minutes before headlights approached from behind. I won't say that I was not relieved when an older couple pulled up and offered us a ride to our house. They explained that they lived just a few miles from where I told them that we lived, and they had been to a sister's house for dinner and were on their way home, and since it was on their way, they didn't mind giving us a ride. I accepted and climbed in the back seat with my little girl. We rode in silence for a few miles when the older woman started talking to my daughter. She talked about animals and farms, simple stuff that little kids enjoy hearing about. As they talked, though, I noticed that the old man's eyes in the rearview mirror, they were lingering on my daughter. I quickly moved and picked my daughter up, placing her on the other side of me, next to the rear passenger side door. The old man huffed a little bit, and the woman continued to talk. And that's when I noticed that the woman was looking behind her, beside the seat, and staring oddly at my daughter. By now, we were a few blocks from the house, and I told them to stop the car and let us out, that we would go to my brother's house that was just there. I'm an only child, but before my daughter could say anything about me not having a brother, I squeezed her hand a little and she just stopped. The man argued with me for a second, and didn't want to stop the car. He acted like I had insulted him, and proceeded to say stuff like, "Well, the girl wants to stay with us, but you can get out. And I wasn't planning on this shit." By now, I was scared and severely pissed off. I politely told the man to stop the car then and now, or I would Rio his face off and use it to gag him. He stopped, and as we got out, the woman turned to my daughter saying, "Remember I said you can come and play with my horses anytime, sweetie." Then, turning to the old man, she said, "What did you do? We're almost there. Did you see her? What's wrong with you?" The old woman's last sentence was muffled by me slamming her door and walking to the first house with lights still on. I called the police, gave a report, and they took us home from there. A few days later, I took it upon myself to drive by where they had said that they lived, and the house was empty, and looked like it had been for quite a while. I still call the county sheriff every now and then to see if they ever found anything out, but they haven't. G'day mates, it's Busta here. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. If you would like more scary stories too, you can click on the card at the top right of your screen or on one of the annotations on your screen right now. As always guys, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. And also, if you would like content early and completely advert-free for as little as $1 a month, feel free to click on the link to my Patreon account and sign up there for regular MP3 format stories. Thanks again for tuning in and for all the love as always, guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.